Honestly, this is not the video I was planning on making today, but sometimes you choose the video and sometimes the video chooses you. So I just got back from a statewide music festival with a bunch of my percussion students, and what I saw there was honestly pretty disturbing. Just a few things that I saw on kit after kit after kit that I thought, I need to make a video about this. Almost every single drum set that I saw had at least one of these problems, if not multiple problems. And I know they're pretty simple. As you progress through this video, you're gonna think to yourself, okay, these are obvious. How can people not know this? But again, I saw it on a lot of different drum kits. So I just wanted to get this information out there. And if it helps even one drummer, I'll feel happy. So we're gonna talk about some pretty serious bass drum spur neglect, causing a lot of stability issues in the drum set and some damage to hoops, pedals, and more. It's almost enough to give you nightmares. So let's get into it right now. The legs on your bass drum are called spurs, and they basically have three jobs. The first job is to give the drum stability so that it doesn't rock or rock and roll, side to side. Most drum sets have the toms mounted right on top of the bass drum, so you want stability for those drums just to exist, but then also when you play those drums, you don't want the bass drum moving around. The second thing the spurs are designed to do is to keep the drum shell just a little bit up off the ground. And the third job is to keep the drum from sliding forward when you're playing it with the pedal. So let's talk about how to get your spurs adjusted correctly so that they do all of those jobs and help you look great while you play. Before we talk about adjusting the spurs, let's talk about floors for just a second. Drums are not designed to be played on what's called a bare floor. So if it's just wood or concrete or tile or linoleum or something like that, you probably don't want to be playing drums on it. You want a rug or carpet of some kind. And there are a lot of good products designed. Almost every drum manufacturer has some version of a drum rug, or you can just get any piece of carpet or rug that's lying around. Honestly, one of my very favorite drum rugs that I played for years was a $15 special from the Home Depot. Okay, so first let's talk about stability. Stability means that both spurs are going to be in contact with the floor. So you've got stability on both sides of that drum. This weekend at the festival that I went to, a lot of the drum kits, the spurs were either loose, so they weren't actually providing a lot of stability, or they did not in fact touch the ground, so the drum was moving around quite a bit. So like I mentioned before, this is going to create a couple of problems. One is when you're actually playing that bass drum with the kick drum, it's going to move. And like I mentioned before, if your toms are mounted in the top of the bass drum, they're going to move around while they play. Or if your kit is like this one, it only has one tom on it. And so the drum simply will not stand upright if those spurs are not adjusted correctly and providing stability. To get the most lateral stability or side-to-side stability out of the drum, you'd theoretically want those spurs just to point straight down into the ground. That would give you the most strength. But they also need to provide a little bit of resistance for when you're actually playing the drum with the pedal. So most manufacturers have those spurs pointed a little bit forward, about a 15 or 20 degree angle. And on a modern drum set, built in the last 20 to 30 years, the joint of that spur, the part where it actually moves or folds in and out of the drum, is going to have a stop or a preset or even a couple of presets that give you the option of putting it at a specific angle that'll be good for both of those purposes. On most drum sets, this is going to mean that the spurs contact the ground somewhere in the same range as where the front hoop hits the ground. They're pretty close. I recommend just using one of those presets from the factory. If for some reason there's not a preset, it's fairly easy to eyeball the angle of your spurs so that they're both the same angle as each other. One thing I do is I'll set the bass drum on the batter head, either on the floor or on a drum throne so it's up a little bit higher and easier to see. Then I'll just adjust the first leg about where I want it, use my eyeballs to adjust the second leg about where I want it. For this example, I just sort of eyeballed the length of the spurs, but in just a minute I'm going to talk about a couple of ways to get that exactly the same length on either side. If you happen to have a less expensive kit or maybe a vintage kit, it's not going to have an angle adjustment. All you can do is adjust the height. Now that you've got the angle of the spurs where you want them, let's talk about lift. Lift is the amount of space or air between the shell of the drum and the floor. Most drummers will agree that you want at least a little bit of lift, although there's going to be plenty of argument as to how much lift is appropriate. It doesn't have to be a lot of lift, just some. What this does is it gets the shell up off the floor so that the hoop, the shell, and the head are more free to vibrate. If the drum is flat on the ground and in contact with the floor, it's going to kill off some of those vibes, kill off some of the tone that you want out of your kick drum. But you don't want to get it too high. If you get it too high up off the ground, for one, it's going to look weird. And for two, it's going to affect how the pedal attaches to the drum. If the angle is too extreme, you might actually do some damage to your hoop, or the pedal will just be weird. It won't feel right. It won't be easy to play. For most of my drums, my default setting is just to get the front head, the resonant head, as close to the ground as I can without actually touching the ground. And then I'll put my pedal on and adjust from there. For me, it's probably between 1/2 inch and 1 inch. It's an amount of space that you're not even going to notice from the audience unless you know the drum is off the floor. Since your drum will be different from mine and all hoops are different and pedals are a little bit different, just experiment. You'll find a place that you really like that looks good and feels good to you. Okay, now, while you're working at getting your drum at the ideal height, you're going to want to get the spurs at exactly the same length. This does a couple of things for you. Number one, if you do have your toms mounted on the bass drum, it's going to make them so they're nice and even and level, or the drum is not leaning anywhere. And the second thing for me is it has to do with pedal adjustment. You can put the pedal exactly between the two tension rods or lugs on the batter side, and it's even. It sits flat on the floor because the drum itself will be flat and level. There's a few ways to do this, the simplest of which is just to take something flat and low and set it under the resonant side, the front side of the bass drum, and then adjust the legs till they both come into contact with the floor. If you want to get a little bit technical and nerdy about it, grab a measuring tape and you can measure the length from the floor to really any part of the spur that's consistent on both sides. And if you want to get even more exact and nerdy, grab a small level. In this example, I'm using a bullet level on top of the drum. I'm going to put one leg where I want it and then adjust the other leg until that level is exactly right, exactly straight and centered. All right, one quick note about the tips of your spurs. Again, the modern drum set, most of your spurs are going to be a bare metal tip. This digs into the carpet and it keeps the drum from sliding forward. And in most cases, unless you are a seriously heavy hitter, this is going to be enough to keep the drum nice and steady, solid without going anywhere. And then on the case of this drum, and probably your drum set too, there's also a rubber tip that you can screw down over the spike. I will sometimes just get the tip of the spike set in the carpet and then I'll screw that rubber down to where it just touches the carpet. Gives it a little bit more stability, but you know, for the most part, I just use the metal tip. Okay, the next thing that I saw and I see frequently in schools and with young students all over the place is if they have to move the drum set, they'll pick up the entire bass drum assembly, toms and all, with the pedal hanging off the drum hoop. And it just, man, just don't. Please, don't do it. I was going to show a shot of me picking up one of my bass drums with the pedal still attached to the hoop, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. I'm sorry. You know, the best case scenario if you're going to carry the pedal around attached to the bass drum hoop is that over time it's going to put unnecessary stress and pressure, and eventually it's going to crack or break that hoop. I've also seen more times than I can count, maybe that pedal isn't tightened on all the way, and so as you're carrying it, the pedal falls. This could do damage to the pedal or put a dent in the floor, crack a piece of tile, you know, scratch the floor. And I've also seen students that are trying to carry that bass drum assembly through a doorway and they smack the pedal right into the doorway and it rips off and goodbye hoop, it's gone. So the solution to this is easy. It just takes a few seconds. Before you pick that bass drum up, loosen the pedal, lift up just a little bit on the batter side hoop, pull the pedal off and carry them as separate attachments. If you have to make an extra trip, you have to make an extra trip, but it is worth it. Then when you get the bass drum set where you want it, just follow the opposite process. Lift up on that batter side hoop, slide the pedal where you want it, and tighten it just enough to stay. I know I'm probably a little bit crazy about it, but I want my bass drum hoops to look nice and function well and last as long as they possibly can. You may even consider getting something like a hoop saver or some type of product that allows you to tighten the pedal onto the hoop without doing a lot of damage. Another way to preserve those hoops is when you do put the bass drum pedal on, don't over tighten. Have I said that enough? Don't over tighten. With most pedals, they've got Velcro or a nice rubber backing on the bottom of the pedal, so they're actually gonna help keep the bass drum from sliding as well. There's just not a good reason to really crank down when you're clamping the pedal to the hoop. Okay, and lastly, this is just one small detail. It doesn't really impact your playing, but it's something that can make you look like a professional or make you look like an amateur. And that is getting your bass drum logo straight on the drum. Now this can be super frustrating. I can't tell you the amount of time I've spent with certain drums where if it's kind of a weird logo or if it's a bigger drum, it's hard to get that thing exactly straight. So one trick I've learned, and it's not exactly foolproof, but it'll help, is just simply to take a piece of string and stretch it between two of the lugs. That just gives you a straight line reference point that's lined up with the drum, so you can use it to adjust the logo. You don't even have to take the head off. Just loosen the tension rods enough that you can move the head independently of the hoop, and when you've got it where you want it, then tighten them back down where you want them. Another thing that can help is that some head manufacturers actually have a manufacturing mark or a mounting mark that's on the collar of the bass drum hoop, and that's either at the 12 o'clock position straight up or at the 6 o'clock position straight down. And you can use a measuring tape to put that mark exactly halfway between the two nearest lugs. Taking care of these details might take you a little bit of time, but usually it's a one-time investment, so it's worth it to make sure that it's right. Not only will playing the kit be a better experience, but you're also going to look like you know what you're doing. Hey, you made it to the end of the video. Thank you so much for sticking around. If there was anything here that you learned today that you liked or that helped you to have a better experience drumming, I would really appreciate you subscribing to my channel and giving this video a like. Thank you again for being here, and I'll see you on the next one. But in just a minute, I cannot English. I cannot English.